Do not worry about it.
Wonderful.
And
Is the shot okay from your end? Is there anything you need
yeah,
me to do?
it's very literary.
You
It's perfect. um,
can't see the whole shelf full of boxes and other garbage in the back.
yeah, but so tell me about that typewriter.
It's an old Royal typewriter that I have to say I've used every now and again, but was acquired, I don't know, 25 years ago at a garage sale, and is inordinately heavy. Yet I seem to schlep it around to various places.
Yeah, it's like you don't use it, but it's more like a good luck totem, right?
My handwriting is so bad that there was a period of time that I thought I would actually, bang out things like thank you notes with it,
Yeah.
but the keys still stick. I've had it serviced and it still doesn't work quite well.
Right. Um, so tell me, this is sort of a unique way for you to do a book. I mean, you obviously are very well respected for your earlier books, and not just respected, but they sold really well. So what was it like working with the CEO of Starbucks? That must have been a new experience for you.
Well, I went in with some trepidation, with the healthy skepticism of a war correspondent. I figured, what did he really care about this issue? Was this all just a ploy to sell more coffee? But I quickly came to conclude that his passion and the company's commitment around veterans was pretty genuine. And I figured, look, I go into this thing, and even if it didn't work out, we'd still do something good for veterans. And I emerged from it really surprised that he was a CEO. Usually CEOs write books about themselves or their company, right? These are tales of self-aggrandizement. This was a rare case where a CEO wanted to work on a book project about other people, about people who have made a remarkable contribution to our country, who've taken great risk, displayed enormous valor, have come back home to do some pretty profound things. And that's not the usual arena for the sort of journalist CEO type of collaboration. But we were so motivated by the subject matter and getting to know our characters, delving into their experiences at wartime, understanding what they were now doing on the home front in some cases, really propelled us forward. And we became true partners in all of this. We traveled around the country together. We did interviews together, and it's an interesting dynamic. I was initially a little worried. You go in with somebody with the star power of Howard Schultz into a conversation. How does that affect things? And actually, it was a remarkably great interviewing tactic, if you will, because I could go and I could focus in sort of the minutiae to help get the data points of the narrative right. But he'd come in with these sort of bigger questions that were thought-provoking, that drew characters into new places. And so it actually turned out to be quite a good collaboration.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I guess, not knowing what you just said, I assumed that, you did all the reporting, all the interviewing, and he just kind of attached his name to it and he wrote like half of the introduction. So that's nice to hear.
So we actually did a number of the interviews together. Did I write kind of first drafts of chapters? Yeah. But I'd send them to him late in the evening Eastern time, and by the equivalent of 5, 6 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, he had read through them. He had he was coming back with questions, with thoughts, with meaningful contributions. This wasn't just go and write it and I'll slap my name on it type of venture. I sort of had been expecting that going in, but it was a real collaboration.
Yeah. So it seems pretty routine for us to say of any soldier who serves in the Middle East right now that they're full of bravery and courage. So I'm guessing that the selection process to have chosen the soldiers who actually do end up in the book must have been pretty intense, because how did you pick the ones who actually, you must have interviewed more people than you put in the book.
Of course. And in fact, it was a very difficult challenge to sort of narrow it down to so few stories. And quite frankly, we were looking for stories that felt representative of different types of heroism and sacrifice, and contribution to our country. So it shouldn't be read as, oh, this is a top 10 list. But even so, you could argue on one hand, there's so many great stories, sort of shooting fish in a barrel. On the other hand, you wanted to find particularly evocative, meaningful characters. And so I reached out to a number of top generals, actively serving and retired, and said to them, hey, look, I'm working on this project. In your time in command, you undoubtedly have signed off on hundreds, if not thousands, of nominations for awards. You've witnessed or heard of great bravery and heroism among the troops you've commanded. Which are the few cases that are still sticking under your skin today? Which are the ones that you remember most vividly? And so I used that also as a helpful starting point. And so I took inputs from friends who were senior leaders, and research assistant and I set about delving into award citations for everybody who would receive medals of honor, distinguished service crosses and Navy crosses and so forth, and then look to see what we could pull together. But for instance, the first chapter, the story of Dr. Bill Krisoff, who at age 60 had lost his son, a Marine in Iraq, and went back to work as an orthopedic surgeon in Reno, Nevada, but no longer found it meaningful, and decided one day that he actually wanted to serve his country just like his son had. Actually, both sons. He had another son who had just joined the Marine Corps, and called up a Navy recruiter and asked if he could join the Naval Reserve Medical Corps, and they had a great conversation. And the guy then finally asked him, "Sir, how old are you?" And he says, "I'm 60." And the recruiter almost laughs at him and says, "You're 18 years too old." But Dr. Krisoff doesn't give up, and he eventually meets former President Bush, convinces Bush to kind of intervene on his behalf, and Dr. Krisoff then gets an exemption, joins the Navy Reserve. Everybody thinks, okay, great, a father who's lost a son at war, joining, he's going to go spend one weekend a month helping at a hospital, stateside. And in 2008, he goes off to Iraq for 7 months. And he comes back and doesn't even have time to unpack a suitcase when he realized there's an urgent need for an orthopedic surgeon in southern Afghanistan, right at the height of President Obama's surge there. There are all these roadside bombs that are taking off the legs of our troops. It is an orthopedic surgeon's war. And so at age 63, he puts up his hand to go to war, and he goes there for 7 months, lives in a tent with 10 other guys, sleeps on a cot. And in those 10 months, is either the primary or assisting trauma surgeon on 225 cases, saving the lives of dozens of Americans. Remarkable story. I got to that story through a 2-star Marine general who's somebody I've known for a while, who I've spent a lot of time with in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I wrote to him and said, here's the project I'm working on with Howard. Who do you think I should write about? And when he started to tell me about Dr. Krisoff, I was like, this is a no-brainer. You can't not.
Right. No, my father's an orthopedic surgeon, so I know what it takes, and it's much harder over there. So, but one thing that struck me is that this book really wouldn't have been necessary if both the Pentagon and the U.S. government had already had in place programs that would help post-deployment soldiers with employment, mental health, that kind of thing. Do you feel like, Starbucks aside, that there has been improved efforts in that arena?
I think it's getting better. I think the efforts to help address the physical and mental health challenges of our returning service members in the early years of our engagement in Iraq and Afghanistan were woefully inadequate. Efforts to help ensure successful transitions when men and women were taking off their uniforms and entering civilian life were also lacking, both from the military and the VA, but also in corporate America, among civic organizations and others. Things have improved. Things have improved greatly from where they were more than 10 years ago. But we're still not where we need to be. And part of the challenge here has to do with the fact that we're a country that is really disconnected from the men and women who serve in uniform. We have this great all-volunteer army. But what that means is that fewer than 1% of our countrymen have put on a uniform and served either in Iraq or Afghanistan or in direct support of those wars. When you add their family members, it's still only about 5% of the country. So most Americans have no skin in the game. And we've been encouraged by our political leaders to sort of go on with business as usual. And, nobody's been asked to go and buy war bonds or sacrifice. There hasn't been any sort of collective mobilization or attention paid. And so what that means is, in 1946, for instance, if you had a neighbor who was kind of wandering the street at night in his bathrobe in sort of a daze, you knew that, okay, he might be suffering from shell shock. Why do you know this? Because around the dinner table, you had a husband or a son or a brother or a father who had come back from war, perhaps, and was talking about this in some cases. And so there were these shared experiences. We don't have that anymore today. So when veterans go into workplaces and apply for jobs, you have HR people who look at them and say, well, you look pretty qualified, but, aren't you racked with post-traumatic stress, or thinking to themselves, is this guy going to come and shoot up the workplace? When the reality is very far from that. And so what we've simply tried to do is sort of inject into the American conversation, and using the great platform of Starbucks to help with this, some of those stories that generations ago would have been shared around the American dining room table or would have been on the evening news that people watched, and just to sort of help seed that back into our conversation.
Yeah. So, as we were talking about, this is a pretty unique collaboration. What is next for you? Are you going back to a book on your own, or?
Well, what's next for me is I'm actually going to continue collaborating with Howard and his team on other sorts of social impact projects. So it was such a rewarding thing. I am now going to be working on some documentary film projects, as well as potentially some other book projects, in collaboration with Starbucks, using the company's platform as a way to help disseminate thoughtful nonfiction content. It's a company with great reach and a desire to want to make a positive contribution. And so for me, I had a great 20-year career at the Washington Post. I've reported from 36 countries. This is a chance to try to take my storytelling to a different and wider audience, but also remaining true to focusing in on important issues of our time.
Yeah. Well, good luck with it. We'll look forward to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for making some time for us today.
A pleasure to talk to you.
All right. Have a good day.
Everything you needed?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.